This video tutorial is for the first assignment in the vector graphics unit. This is creating an animated character using only shapes. We've been using Photoshop for the last couple of months. Now Photoshop, I'll open this up, is a raster graphics program, and that means that images in a raster graphics program are actually comprised of a bunch of individual little boxes of color called pixels, and you can see that when you zoom in really close to an image in Photoshop, that a raster graphics programmer has to remember a couple of things. It has to remember that this little box here is that dark brown, that this box is a little darker, and this box is a little darker, and it remembers all of those pixels. The more of those little boxes or pixels that you have, the higher quality or resolution of the image. And these programs have to remember each of those little boxes. When you move far enough away from a raster image, it looks like an actual photograph does. And so raster is very good for recreating photorealistic style images. But there's another program called Adobe Illustrator that takes care of vector images. And if you will open up Adobe Illustrator, it looks a lot like Photoshop at first glance. And a lot of the tools are the same, but it's a very different program. When I choose File New, one of the first things that you should see, there is no option for resolution when you're creating a new document. Now in Photoshop, you had to specify the resolution, or how many pixels per inch there would be in your image. In Illustrator, we don't work with pixels. It's actually all math-based, and you don't have to do the math, but you have to specify a couple of things, and then it figures it out for you. Because of that, the only thing we have to do when we create a new document is decide what size it is. I'm just going to pick the standard paper size. It should just default to print here. Make sure in inches that it's 8.5 by 11, and we're just going to use that standard orientation. When I click OK, I have the screen. Now, there are a lot of tools that look the same, but Illustrator is very different. So the way the Illustrator works is, I'm going to get out the rectangle tool and draw a little box on the screen, and I'll zoom in on it a little bit. In Illustrator, everything is made up of points. As you can see here in the corners, these little squares are your points, and lines. And a line is just a connection of 2 points. Those lines can have different colors, different thicknesses. The inside of a shape can have color, but it's all very different. And when I create something in Photoshop or in Illustrator, I can just click on it, move it. I can move it around. It's like you're always in free transform. I can grab one of the corners, drag it bigger or smaller. I can go past one of the corners and rotate it just by selecting it. And if I want to get rid of a shape I've created, I can just click on it and press delete. So it's a little different. Each thing that you bring into Illustrator is its own little thing that you can move around. Also, when I create a shape, so I'll come here to, if I hold down my mouse on the rectangle tool, you'll see you have rounded rectangles, ellipses. If I hold down Shift, I can create a perfect circle with that. When you are selected on something, you have 2 color options with most of the things in Illustrator. This big full box is the fill. That's the inside color, and if I change that color, either by double clicking on it here and changing it, which brings up your color picker just like in Photoshop, I can adjust the color here, click OK, and now the fill color, or the inside of it, is that light blue. I also have swatches, which are saved colors that I can choose from, and I even have my color picker up here in the top right hand corner that I can also change. Now that's one of the colors. I also have this other box that seems to have an empty inside. This is the stroke, or the color of the line around it. And I can change the color too, so now my line is red. And if I'm selected on an object, changing the color here will change the object. So I could have a brown line with a green fill. I can also make that line thicker. Over here in stroke, I can turn that weight up or down and make that line thicker. And also with the fill and the stroke, I can choose none instead. I can have no line or no fill. And that's what this little symbol right here is for. So I can say, you know what, I just want a green circle with no stroke around it. I click on none. That little red line through it means that there is nothing. I can even have a shape or a line that has no fill or stroke. It still exists, but it disappears. The only way you can tell it's there is by highlighting it, and then you can see the outline. Now this line here is light blue because each layer in Illustrator has its own color. And layer 1 defaults to a light blue. And that lets you know which layer you're on. So layers still apply, but they work a little different than in Photoshop. So I'm going to delete that circle. Click back here so that I have my default white fill black stroke, and I'm going to create an ellipse tool. This is going to be my character's head. And your assignment today is you're going to create any kind of character that you want in Illustrator, and we're only going to use the shapes that we find inside of this toolbar. And so you can choose any character. I will make Batman. I'm going to hold down Shift and drag it, and if I hold down spacebar as well, I can move it around on the page. So I can decide where it is, or I can always just take my black arrow or my selection tool and move it around later. And I'm going to make my line a little thicker by increasing the stroke there. And then I also want my fill to be a dark gray. So I'll choose the dark gray here to be his face. Now, I've got a bunch of shapes. I'm going to do his body too while I'm here. Change it from the ellipse tool to the rectangle. That M is the quick key for that. And underneath here, I'm going to draw just another box. And it's going to be a really bobble-headed, cartoony kind of version of your character. And you can also go to Google Image Search and find a reference for that. Now, in Illustrator, when I bring in objects, they will always go on top of each other. So the order that they'll be laid on top of each other is the order that they're made. I made the circle first and the rectangle second, so the rectangle's on top. I can change that order in a couple of different ways. The first one is just by right-clicking. Make sure you might not be able to see that on your screen. But if you go to Arrange, you have some options. You can bring forward or bring backward, bring to front, which is all the way to the front of the layers, or bring to back, which will put it all the way in the back. You can also hold down Control and press those square brackets to the right of the P. The left bracket will move it backward, and the right bracket will move it forward. Now, right now we only have 2 objects on here, so I only have to press it once. But if you've made 5 things, you might have to hold down Control and click the left bracket 5 times to move it to the back. And each one is just above the next one. And that'll put that rectangle behind the head. Now I'm also going to use the rounded rectangle tool and create an arm. I want to use the same one for the arms and the legs. To make a copy of something, I think the easiest way to do it is if I just move something normally, it just moves. But if I pick up something and I hold down the Alt key before I let go of the mouse, instead of moving, I create a copy of it there. And that way I can adjust these. And I'm just going to rotate them. I want to move these to the back, so once again I press Control and that left bracket right next to the P, and I might have to press it a couple of times to move it to the back. I'm going to do the same thing for the legs. And those ones are already in the back because they're copies of previous things that were in the back, and I can rotate them. Now, to create more complex objects, so I want to do his ears next. I'll hold down on the shape tool. If I want triangles, I have to use the polygon tool. The way I do that is I click on the polygon tool, and then I can just click on the screen somewhere, and that's going to pop up this little window. And I can change the sides. I could have an octagon or a hexagon. I can do 3 sides, and that'll give me the rectangle. Now when I hold down the mouse, it's going to be that until I click somewhere and change those again. I'll delete those. I want a really thin rectangle, or triangle. So I'm going to hold down my mouse. If I hold down Shift, it'll also force it to be straight up and down. And then I can use my Move tool and drag them a little skinnier. I'm going to put one there. Hold down the Alt key and move one over there. Now I want to make these all one shape. That way I can make more complex shapes. If I come up here to Window, I have one of my options is Pathfinder. So I click on the Pathfinder tool, and that'll bring in this. Now Pathfinder has a bunch of different options. I need to choose all of the shapes that I want to manipulate. I'm going to click on that one, hold down Shift, and click on my other 2 shapes that I want to make into one big one. And to do that, that's just your first option here in Pathfinder, which is Unite. When I click on that, it's going to take all those shapes and make them one. There's also a lot of other things that you can do in Pathfinder. I can, for example, let me get a different color here. I'm going to make a rectangle and put a circle on top of it in the corner. If I take both of those, I hold down Shift and I select the other one, or I can just take my selection tool and select them both that way. This second Pathfinder option will take the front shape out of the back shape, which gives me a brand new shape. So if I want to get a half moon shape, for example, I could have two circles, one on top of the other one. And when I want to combine them, I can click on minus front, and now I have a shape. There's also transform, or align is what I'm looking for. Align will take any two or more shapes and line them up in the way that you want. So if I wanted to be vertically lined up, I can click on this one, and that'll force them to be that way. If I wanted to be centered horizontally, I can click on that one. And that's a good way of lining things up too. And if I do that first, now when I click on my minus front, I'll get a perfect half moon. There's also the intersect. That third Pathfinder option allows you to take any two shapes and just it leaves only the place where they're overlapping each other, which isn't as useful, and I don't ever use the fourth option. But these first two, the minus front and the unite, can make some really interesting shapes that'll be useful for this. So let's go back to the polygon tool. I'm going to get out, make it white again. I'm going to make his eyes next. Maybe I'll make his eyes a little bigger. And I'm just going to try to recreate any character that I want using just these shapes. We don't want to go into making our own kinds of shapes yet. That's for a later assignment. But if I do want to make something a little more complex, like maybe for where his mouth opening is, maybe I'll start with a rectangle, and then I want to move these parts in. With the black arrow, whenever you click on something with that, you automatically select the entire object. With the white arrow, or the direct selection tool, if I click off of this and I click back on, I can take those individual points that make up a vector shape and I can adjust them separately. With the white arrow, I can take let's do this. Let's pull this one out and pull the bottom ones in. And that allows me to have a little more control over that. And anything that has, anywhere where there's a point, I can take those points and do them separately. And the only way that really works is if you click off the entire shape first, and then when you mouse over, see how the tool changes to let you see that you're clicking on a point? Then you can click on that and move it. And you can tell that a point is selected because it is filled in instead of open like that. I can hold down Shift and move 2 points at once or more by selecting several points. So that way I can get a little bit more of a complex shape too. So I can bring his cowl opening here. Maybe find a good flesh tone color online. Maybe use this is the line segment tool. That allows me just to hold down my mouse and to drag out a line. Now for more complex shapes, I'm going to have to be creative. So I'm going to do his bat symbol on his chest, and then I'll finish this tutorial. So if you don't want to watch that part, you're just using these shapes, try to make something that'd be interesting to you. You can add other elements, you can add a background. If you want to color in a background, you can't just use a paint bucket to fill this in. I would make a new layer, drag it underneath, and then we're going to use the rectangle tool and make a rectangle that's exactly the same size as the page we're working on, because then I can take that rectangle and fill that in. And that's how I can do different colors. And then I would lock that layer so that I can't accidentally grab that every time I'm trying to work on Batman. So if I want to do the symbol, I would start, I'm going to use the Pathfinder a lot on this one. Let's start with, oh, if you get this symbol, by the way, this lets you know that you're trying to draw on a locked layer. You lock a layer over here by clicking this open box next to the eyeball. And that's nice to have if you don't want to mess with something like that background. I'm going to make that background temporarily invisible. I'm going to start with some circles because I want to get the edge. So I'm going to make this, hold down Shift with the selection tool, select both, and minus that front one from the back. So that's going to be the edges of the bat symbol. And then maybe I'll do something like a rectangle tool in the middle. I want those all to be lined up horizontally, so I'll come here to align, click on that one, and now they're lined up right down the middle there. I'll do another box here, maybe use a couple of triangles at the top. And a big triangle at the bottom. There's also a star tool that can be useful. And I could be more careful. I'm going to pause it and finish, readjust. Once I have those, if I select all of them, and the fastest way to do that is just to take your selection tool, draw a box that at least hits each of the shapes so that they all have that little inside blue outline. And then back to Pathfinder, and I want to unite all of those. And it's a little, I think that bottom part is way too big. I'm going to try and shrink that down a little bit. But now I can take the ellipse tool, don't hold down shift, so I have the option to make an ellipse. Because I made that yellow oval later, it comes up on top, so I'll hold down control and the left bracket. And then if I want to combine two things, so I don't want to every time I have to take the shield is to click on this, hold down shift, click on the other thing. If I press Control G for group, that will combine those two items until I choose to ungroup it. You can also come up to Object and group and ungrouper there. And ungroup is Shift Control G. And now I can take that symbol, shrink it down, put it right there. While I've got that yellow, maybe I can do the belt. And as I do this, it's going to create a character. And I feel like as long as you keep with the basic shapes, you're going to learn a lot about the basics of Illustrator. This can be a lot of fun. You can see some examples up on the Facebook page as well. So that is your assignment, is to spend some time, spend about a half an hour, 45 minutes, getting some real good detail on your character or multiple characters.